Again, welcome. Welcome. You're joining Shout It from the Rooftops, do-it-yourself marketing made fun, efficient, and cost-effective. So this is a session of River Network, and we are happy to bring back in the team from Bold Bison. This is the second session that they have done for our broader River Network, the third one, excuse me, for our Rooting Resilience grantees. And so while we wait and give folks a chance to jump in, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, share your name, your organization, where you're calling from. That would be great. And we will be dropping into the chat here as soon as we're done with the intros, the evaluation form. We just ask if you might go ahead and open it now, and that way it'll be a reminder as we wrap up the session to go ahead and give us some feedback, which is super helpful as we plan future sessions. So this is, again, the second of a three-part series on communications that Bold Bison is leading us on, and super excited to have them. If you want to go ahead and flip to the next slide. So if you are new to River Network, we are a national organization. We are focused on growing and strengthening a national network of advocates, river advocates, water and water justice advocates. We do have a map of our water protectors on our website. We encourage you to take a look. I'll drop our link into the chat so you can learn more about our work. But a lot of what we do is, in essence, capacity building. And so it's been great to partner with Bold Bison to bring their communications and marketing expertise to our network. So with that, if you want to go to the next slide, Patrick. I just want to introduce them, and I'm going to go ahead and just turn it over to them. We've got Brandon Hayes and Patrick Williams from Bold Bison, and we are looking forward to an interactive session with them, and just encourage you to please stay engaged. Use the chat to drop your questions, and without further ado, Brandon, Patrick, it's all yours. Thank you for
Excellent.
joining.
Thank you, Deanna.
Mhm.
Thank you for that warm introduction. Hello, everybody. We're really thrilled to be with River Network again for this afternoon's session. So shout it from the rooftops. To reinforce what Deanna was just saying, this is the time of year when a lot of nonprofits are shouting it from the rooftops. We hope everyone, had a wonderful Giving Tuesday for those of you who observe on Tuesday of this week. But yeah, we want to talk about marketing today, making it fun, efficient, and cost effective. We're going to walk through a bunch of learning. We're going to talk about some tools. We're going to leave you with a couple of tools to take with you coming out of the session today. Okay. Um, Briefly about Bold Bison. I know there's some familiar faces in the room, but for those of you who haven't had a chance to meet us yet, we are a full service communications and marketing firm that focuses on clients across the nation who are doing work in conservation, local food systems, environmentalism, climate, environmental justice, and a little bit of the arts. We do have some play in there. And we are a team of five. Three of us are on the call today. So Patrick, who is our Director of Creative Services, he is going to be our lead trainer today. I thank you in advance, offering gratitude for letting me facilitate the workshop today and facilitate the conversation. We're also joined by our creative specialist, Frida Ramirez, who's here to lend support and insights as we go along, especially in the Q&A portions of today. So speaking of Q&A portions, a little bit about what to expect and how to get the most out of the workshop. We ask that you reduce distractions, and phones and email as much as possible. We know that that can be very difficult when you are on a Zoom, especially late in the year with a lot of sort of annual appeal things to get out and social media messages to craft and all of that kind of thing. But we do invite, for those of you who are in the room with us live as this is being presented, and also for those of you who are watching later, to give yourself a moment, get a cup of tea, get a cup of coffee, and sort of be present here in the space. Because this is definitely a workshop and not just a webinar. Feel free to take notes as you go to prep questions. Feel free to ask questions both by raising your hand with the raise your hand tool, turning your mic on, asking questions in the room, or using the chat. We will be watching, Frida and I, while Patrick's doing a little bit of lecturing a little bit later, walking through some learning. Frida and I will definitely have an eye on the chat as we go. So know that there are multiple ways to engage and ask questions. We are going to use breakout rooms today. We're going to do it twice. This will definitely be interactive. When you're in those breakout rooms, or when we're having a full group discussion here in the main room, please do listen actively to the experiences of your fellow participants, because that respect is important. And we ask that you listen to understand and not just listen to respond. So we invite everyone to listen actively today. And then again, center yourself, be present. It's December. Here in Chicago, there's 11 inches of snow on the ground. So sort of in cozy, let's have a nice conversation mode. At least that's the energy that I'm bringing in today. Okay, let's start out by having a conversation as a group. So this is group conversation. Feel free to turn your mic on. Feel free to raise your hand. But we are curious in the room, who is responsible for marketing your organization? Who's responsible? Yeah, Eric.
Sorry, I thought you asked to raise hand.
Oh, sorry. It does it. Oh, I see what you're saying. I don't raise hand to speak into the room, but also to raise hand. I assume that you are responsible for marketing in your organization. That's great. Am I correct there?
Yes.
And what's your title?
Director.
Excellent. Okay. Other folks, who's responsible at, so let me ask it a different way. What I'm trying to say is not necessarily just a show of hands. What I'm trying to say is who is responsible for marketing at your organization? So it could be like Eric, the director, the person in that role. But there are other folks who also can be responsible at any given nonprofit for marketing and communications. Emma, I see your hand.
Hello. Um, as the communications manager, I guess I would manage marketing, but I try to really reinforce it on my team that it's all of our jobs to market. Like every time that you're interacting with someone, you are representing our organization.
I love that. How does your team respond to that? How do they think about that responsibility?
I mean, I think that it's an ongoing kind of learning experience. Some people are a lot more comfortable with that than others.
Mhm.
And we are a newly merged organization, two different river organizations representing the same river, merged maybe 3 months ago now. And so I think we're all getting a little more comfortable speaking about who we now are. And so that's an ongoing thing. But yeah, people feel different levels of comfort with it, most definitely.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Other folks, other examples of who is responsible for communications, for marketing at your organization. In the chat, we're seeing folks who are outreach specialists. So they are responsible for it. Also in the chat, an organization of two, an executive director and a program director. So both of you, absolutely. Other thoughts, other folks sharing sort of your experience at your organization.
I'm happy to share, and I apologize for any background sounds. We're having some construction. My name is Anna Maria Camardo. I'm from the Center for Creative Land Recycling, and we rely a lot on our consultants and our technical assistance experts to do marketing directly to their networks and also to former grantees or prospective grantees who we're hoping to work with. Um, so I guess I'd call that like thought leadership. We rely on them a lot.
Excellent. So consultants, then sort of activating networks, in terms of marketing out what you do. That's great. That's sort of thinking about how you engage, like we've heard, engaging a full team, and now sort of engaging kind of beyond the team as part of this too. That's great. Other thoughts, other examples? Seen in the chat that we have, again, we have a gamut of organizations. So we have a 2-person team, and we have example also of a large organization with marketing and branding teams who are part of the staff. Down to 1 staff member, also an example in the chat, who takes the lead, for folks who take part. Any other thoughts on sort of who is responsible for marketing at your organization?
There's a bad nonprofit marketing joke, the punchline of which is the chief marketing officer at any nonprofit is the executive director's neighbor.
What do you mean by that, Patrick? Unpack that bad joke.
Means that there's a lot of people out in the world who are willing to offer advice on marketing to nonprofits, especially folks who haven't necessarily worked in nonprofit marketing or communications before. And we want to kind of take the presentation today is approaching it from the question of, for those of you who are at smaller organizations, or for those of you who are part-time, or, marketing is one of 7 different full-time responsibilities for you. There's a lot of advice out there, and it's not necessarily always easy to know where to begin. It may, sort of that volume of marketing advice that's out there isn't easy to sort through, and it isn't easy to know what necessarily is applicable to where you should begin focusing on. And so really that is kind of the crux of the learning today, is helping you kind of make sense of where to get started with some of this.
We're seeing in the chat, exactly that example. So all in a situation where no one is expressly responsible, but sort of everyone kind of does it ad hoc. And then also, I think important too, an example from Deanna that trying to make marketers out of board members, not forgetting that the board also has some responsibility in terms of marketing, even if the staff is leading that effort. Okay. So in thinking about where we're going to head from here, it was sort of opened up, kind of got some folks speaking. In terms of goals, what we want to do is we want to help you elevate where your organization stands in its marketing journey, so that you can focus on sort of those relevant strategies. So for whoever needs to do it, again, we're going to have some tools we're going to share later that can be useful for no matter who is responsible for marketing and communications. We're talking a little bit about the big changes. Like, things are very volatile, particularly around social media, but also in terms of larger narratives and sort of the way that people are consuming media. So thinking about those audience behavior changes, and how we can continue to be effective, in terms of our marketing strategies. And then we also want to provide some context, guidance, and again, tools to help you develop your 2026 marketing or communications plan. So that's what we have in store for us in the session today. Okay. I'm going to make you talk, though, to each other a little bit more before we sort of dive into working through the materials that we've pulled together for you. So what we're going to do is put you into breakouts. We're going to pair you off, is what's going to happen. And what we're going to ask you to do is to think through this question: what challenges do you face in testing market strategies for your organization? So the conversation can include, part of it can be sort of what you do, kind of sharing with each other the tactics that you're using, the strategies that you're using. But we really want you to think about, what challenges do you face in testing those strategies? We're going to give you about 6 minutes to share, to have that conversation, to begin to open up, sort of thinking about how you're testing those strategies. Since you won't be able to see the chat and sort of see, us when you go into your breakout rooms, I'm providing a link here in the chat right now, which is a document for the instructions. So again, go ahead and click on that link so that you have the question in front of you, so that when we put you in your breakouts, you're not suddenly like, wait a minute, what were we supposed to talk about again? So there's the instructions. But again, what challenges do you face in testing market strategies at your organization? Sort of thinking a little bit about that, sharing those challenges and some of what you do about that. Any questions about what we're asking you to do in your pairs in the breakouts? Okay, we're going to put you into breakouts. We're going to come back and we're going to have a full group conversation to debrief. Patrick, are the breakouts ready? Excellent. Okay, the breakout rooms are open. Go ahead, again, about 6 minutes. This won't be too long. And we'll see you back here at just about 23 minutes past the hour. Deanna, do you want to go ahead and pause the recording? Excellent. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, I'm curious. Who would like to share what you talked about? Something that you found interesting in your conversation?
I could go. My name's Ariana Collins. I'm with the Hoosier River Watershed Association. There are three of us in our group, and I wrote down that we all do very similar things about social media, flyers, e-newsletters. We could track those numbers, but none of us have test marketing strategies. So we're not sure what works best. Maria had mentioned about wanting to do more video. I definitely would agree with that. I would love to do more of that too. But when I post things, I just feel like crickets are actually loud. Who came up with hearing crickets? I don't feel like I'm hearing very much, and so we also talked about that programming is a part of our marketing, but the challenge to testing is how to test that.
Great. So sort of hearing cricket, sort of silence out there, kind of generally when you're posting, then also thinking about ways to test programming and sort of as marketing, as communications, is sort of some of the challenges that you have. Great, thank you. Anna, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, hello, I'm Anna. I'm with the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance. Also, hi Ariana, I know her, so that's fun.
Oh yeah.
My group, we were all talking that all of us also come from small organizations like Ariana was talking about. And so some of like the time restraints on how much time you have to do things makes it really hard. And yeah, some of that similarity, and it's hard, and then you don't really know what works, and then you don't know if you do have any budget at all, like what you should put that budget towards, or like if you have $1,000, should you put it towards like putting some money behind social posts, or should you try to put it into something else, like where if you do have the resources, like where you would even start to put in and invest more in.
Excellent. So time, capacity, sort of where to use those things best, because those are things, money and time are things we're short of. So how do we best make use of those and thinking about whether marketing's effective? Great. Great, great. Other thoughts, other things that popped up in folks' conversations? I will share that in the main room, while folks were in the breakouts, there were a few people who stayed in the main room, and one question bubbled up, which was sort of even as a sort of foundational, what is the difference between marketing and communications? How are they the same? How are they different? You sort of, what are we talking about when we're talking about these things too, which can be a sort of fundamental challenge too. Anybody else?
I suppose this is more of a comms challenge, but my organization does a lot of work with people getting grants from state and federal agencies. Those applications generally open annually, and then the projects have timelines that are up to decades long. So actually getting the information we need to be sharing success stories and getting metrics for how much we were able to support grantees is just takes a long time. So we have to be able to find effective ways to communicate that and also like keep reminding people of it, even if we don't have new milestones or groundbreakings, things like that.
Yeah. So a lot of this work is this sort of very long time horizon, sort of, making something happen over such a long time period. And in these moments, we're sort of trying to fight for attention, to eyeballs and sort of dollars too. Again, Giving Tuesday on Tuesday. Sort of how can you reconcile those two types of things and some of those challenges to the narrative? That's great. Maybe one more.
I can go.
Thank
Hi,
you.
friends. We did not chat about this in my group, but I'm just thinking of it now as I was listening to everyone else. Um, our organization is very small, and we have everyone kind of do their own marketing, as it sounds like a lot of other organizations here do as well. And I think one of our challenges is differing levels of expertise or experience within the marketing world amongst our staff. So if we're asking all of our program managers, for example, to facilitate and market their programs, I feel like we have some program managers that are really effective at what they do and their marketing goes a long way, and then some who just don't know exactly what they're doing. So it takes a little bit more time and more training to get someone up to a good standard. And that just takes more time away from other things.
And it also kind of puts different sorts of faces of the organization out as sort of, the public face, and sort of different levels of capacity too. So it's both the sort of resources in terms of time, in terms of money, in terms of, people power and all of that, but then also that experiential difference where, they take one person at the organization very little time to put something together, to put a social media post together, to get it out there, to sort of be very active, and to take other folks, a long time to do that if they even want to do that at all, kind of thing. So trying to find that balance. Great.
Mhm.
Okay. Patrick, shall I hand it off to you?
Sure.
Excellent. All right.
So, good day, everyone, depending on where you are on the continent. So as we, get started here, the one thing I want to say at the top is just, I'm very encouraged to hear we have a lot of folks tuning in from smaller organizations or smaller marketing teams, stuff like that. I know there are a few of you who mentioned that you're from larger organizations where you have an entire team devoted to branding, which is amazing, awesome. We did know that we were going to have a mix of experiences with the River Network members. So we do have some stuff that's, the learning today is a little bit geared more towards those smaller organizations, right? And helping kind of think about where you are, just as a disclaimer at the start of this one. And I wanted to start today by talking about, I'm going to call them the stages of marketing, of nonprofit marketing today. And more than anything, I want to encourage you all to think of this as a framework for helping you assess sort of where your organization or where your program is at and what are the right approaches to market your organization, your program based on where you are. And I encourage you to think of it sort of as three stages in that process. And again, like today's session is premised sort of on that notion of there's a mountain of free marketing advice that exists in the world, and there's any number of AI written LinkedIn accounts that are just throwing any ideas, trying to get you to click on some link to look at something. And we really want to, help you begin to bring in a lens to looking at some marketing advice, to be able to assess sort of, is this relevant for me? Is this actually going to help my organization? To some of the challenges that you all shared coming out of the last breakout. And so the three stages that I want to focus on today are sort of thinking about awareness, reputation management, and then differentiation. We can look at those as awareness is sort of that baseline level. It's where, a lot of organizations who are with us today might be. It's where you're building up your audience and you're trying to get the word out about the work of your organization, about your mission, about your programs and events. As you go a step beyond that, you can think about starting to manage your reputation a little more. And that's where you're trying to cultivate a positive image for your organization, especially as folks in your community are starting to talk about your organization with one another. It's not so much you as the person putting out information and them interacting with it. It's also as folks are starting to talk about you, whether they're partners, whether they're, people who have participated in one of your water rebate programs, anything like that. And then that third level is sort of differentiation. And this is clarifying how and why your organization takes a different approach than others. This is where, you recognize that people understand who your organization is. They understand that you're one of several environmental nonprofits in your community. And so you're really focusing on those strategies and tactics to help people understand why your organization is different than the watershed council in the next county over or something like that, or why you're different than the land trust, for instance. And the three, you can think of these in different ways. You can think of these as sort of a growth cycle over if you're, a newer or smaller organization. You can think of these as tiers, sort of, with the awareness being the baseline that you always want to maintain, reputation management being sort of that standard you want to achieve for, and differentiation being that really nice to have level stuff. Or you could be in a situation where your organization has just been so overwhelmed that you haven't been able to put much time behind marketing, and it's time for a reboot. And so it's sort of assessing where you are kind of on this path. So let's take a look at what the activities look like, the marketing activities that look like behind each of these. So if you're at the awareness level, this is where a lot of your social media and your emails might be encouraging people to visit the website, follow you guys on your whatever accounts you use, subscribe to your newsletter, things like that. You might be out tabling at events, neighborhood festivals, partner organizations, things like that, really just trying to get people to understand that you're here, that you're present in your community. You might be doing swag giveaways, stickers, water bottles, trying to just build up visibility, again, trying to get that audience. Direct mail and donations, obviously, are kind of one of those baseline things. Then partnership building with other established organizations, sort of thinking of, some of your partners as the big sibling that you want to tag along to try to get in front of some of their supporters, if you have aligned audiences or if you're trying to reach some of their same supporters. As you start to look more towards cultivating that positive image for your organization, this is where you might start to focus on earned media for, celebrating your successes and your major events. This is where you definitely might start thinking about some structured content marketing, having different informational series, having different, a blog series or something like that, or having tips of the month, whatever kind of content marketing you want to choose. You'll be doing some marquee publications, more like annual reports, different scientific reports or any kind of research that your organization does. And then speaking engagements, panels and presentations. Again, things where you're trying to cultivate kind of a positive reputation for your organization beyond just the materials that you put out on your social media account. And then finally, into differentiation. This is really where you get into more of those really high-level marketing activities. This is where you're starting to think about brand strategy, or you're doing some strategic communications development to make sure that everyone on your team has the talking points down to be able to explain why you're different than the water management district or another related partner, things like that. You might also have a membership program that really tries to spell out why your organization brings some unique features to your organization. And then this will be the time when you're maybe doing focused marketing campaigns for a few months, or you're doing paid advertising, or you're working with consultants, like a lot of you mentioned, really sort of in helping you stand out among a lot of partners. Again, awareness, reputation, and differentiation. These are not by any means mutually exclusive categories. You don't graduate from one to the next at any point in time. It's sort of the thing you can think about, again, is you might be doing a combination of them. You might be, your organization might be well known, but you're trying to build awareness for one of your programs or one of your upcoming events, sort of things. You might be pulling from a few of these different categories. Or you might be, like I said, you might just need to be starting over, even if your organization has been around for a long time and you're trying to put some more attention behind marketing. In our experience, we would say that most organizations are probably going to be focused on those first two categories, getting the word out and sort of managing your organization's reputation. It's really kind of when you get into differentiation, that's when you're really focusing either on branding specifically because you've identified that you need to update it or refresh it, something like that. Or it's a communications challenge a lot where you're often getting confused with a partner organization. And so you need to spend some time thinking about how to draw some clear distinctions like that, which is just to say it is okay if you feel like most of the things that you do with your limited time in marketing is focused in those first two categories. That is a good place to be. Then to address some of the challenges that came up in the first breakout discussion, I want to talk a little bit about audience. So for audience, very similar to communications, starting with your audience is really kind of where you always want to be. And so for those of you who are working with program managers who maybe aren't the best at marketing, this is a good place to remind them to begin. Anytime you're putting together any marketing strategy or marketing piece, you do want to kind of keep to the same four fundamentals of knowing your audience. What do you want that audience to do? What are the key messages you need to have to convince them of that? And then how are you going to reach them? And again, this is, applicable whether you're responsible for reaching out to your general supporters as volunteers, donors, board members, anything like that, local folks in your community. But it's also applicable for those of you who are dealing with more specific audiences, whether those are staff at partner organizations, potential program participants, even if you're getting with more narrow and micro audiences, if that's your responsibility, these same kind of four building blocks are still broadly applicable. Not every marketing piece that your organization puts together will be effective on every single audience you have to deal with, which is why we really encourage you to be as specific as possible when you're defining who your audience is. Everyone loves to say, well, the general public is our audience, but that's just not a thing that exists, right? Versus homeowners in our community who are going to participate in our water rebate program. At least just start to get much more specific and begin to think about what do those audiences need, what's an appropriate way to reach them. And that gets into kind of two major things, right? This is two challenges or two obstacles that we see a lot with nonprofit organizations is kind of failing to remember this really fundamental centering your audience and thinking about what they need. One of the big things we see all the time is organizations that fail to provide value or at least useful information to the audience that they're trying to reach, or really blurring that distinction between communications about your organization and offering some marketing that is of value to the audience you're trying to reach. I always like to, offer as an example the nonprofit that goes out to the community festival. They have their table, they have their booth. It's all wonderful. There are families and kids running around, and the Humane Society is there, and the food bank is there, and they hold these really bustling tables. And then people come up to your table and you show them the brochure about how to make a donation through a qualified charitable deduction to your organization. And sort of like, that's great, that's wonderful. What am I ever going to do with this sort of piece? This is not the right audience for this thing, but it's that general information about how to support our organization. Versus thinking about, having a piece for when you're interacting with residents in your community that might be about, have a few at-home creative activities for how kids can learn about water quality, and then have a few tips included for what parents can do to, support water conservation in the house, and then have a quick blurb about your organization so that when someone picks it up and looks through it, they say, hey, this is actually pretty cool and pretty useful and gives us something to do at home. This is a neat organization that I'm going to check out again. Right? It's just sort of thinking about that distinction between what is something that's actually going to be of value to the audience you're trying to reach versus just communicating blankly about what your organization does, which is a trap that just a lot of smaller organizations fall into. The second thing that we see a lot is when folks, we'll be talking in groups like this where we have a lot of marketing, communications, and fundraising folks on a meeting, and they'll all basically acknowledge that I hate going on social media. I hate the amount of email that I get every day. I don't really look at websites anymore. But the way I do it is completely different than my audience. And my audience definitely does not feel the same way whatsoever. So I'm going to put out all of this social media content that no one's ever going to look at because my audience is going to see it, even though I would never look at it or ever care about it. Or I'm going to put out this video that's very dull and boring because it's not interesting to me, but it'll be interesting to my audience. And we say this just, obviously there's a confirmation bias to watch out for, but we do say this as like, go with your gut on a lot of things too when it comes to marketing. And if you don't think that something's going to be effective for you, there's a pretty good chance that it's not going to be effective for your audience either. It's just one of those, we don't offer it as a criticism at all, but sort of just something that we see and kind of an encouragement that you are also, as communications and fundraising professionals, we consume media for a living. And so when we look at something and we say, this is not going to be effective for me, it means it's probably not going to be effective for your audience either. And so if it's, if you're getting that reaction to the stuff that your organization's putting out, it's probably a good indication that it's time to think about a different strategy. And I wanted to raise those both as we look at sort of changes that we're seeing in audience behavior kind of across the board as it relates to traditional marketing strategies. I'm sure you're all aware that nonprofit marketing is having a bit of a moment. You've all mentioned that, like every other nonprofit in the world, we've relied on a combination of free tools and guesswork and hope to get the word out about our organization, having our website and making sure that it has our upcoming events, making social media posts and sending an e-blast, sending out a newsletter with some of our upcoming events or our programs a couple times a year, and sort of just hoping that this works. And as I'm sure you've seen kind of in, just what some folks were sharing earlier, those conventional tactics of putting it out into the world and hoping that people show up are starting to run into their limitations, right? We crassly call this spray and pray, which is really just putting it out there and hope that somebody picks up on the other end and comes to our event or makes a donation, things like that. And as a result, as folks were sharing earlier, you're starting to see a lot of the same donors. You're starting to hear those really loud crickets when you're putting stuff online because it's just not effective. And there are a couple of reasons for this. I'm going to spend, the next 3 slides could each have their own 90-minute workshop. So I'm going to cover it quickly, but a few things, I don't want to dwell on it because I don't want to come across as discouraging and say that there's really no point in trying to do marketing ever, because that's not the takeaway that I want anyone to have. But there's a couple shifts, really. The change in the efficacy of our traditional marketing strategies that we're seeing is really driven by 2 major trends. The first is a shift in social media generally. As I'm sure you're aware, the platforms are changing quite a bit. And they're increasingly evolving into a pay-to-play model, where you basically, in order to access the audiences that we've built up over the last 15 years, you increasingly basically have to put money behind an ad to get eyeballs on it. And even then, the ads that you're paying for aren't necessarily going to the audiences that Meta says are actually seeing them. More importantly, and this is kind of a bigger change in the last few years, is that the For Your Page function that really rose out of TikTok and then bled over into Instagram and now increasingly onto Facebook ate the idea of the follower. You may have 1,500 followers for your nonprofit on Instagram, and the number of them who are actually seeing the material that you put out is probably very small. And a lot of that is just because how the platforms have been reconfigured to keep you kind of in that continuous feed of, as the user, not as the publisher, keep users in that kind of continuous feed of always trying to stay online by giving you the next little bit of info that you might find useful, which means that if you're someone like me and your feed is full of restaurant news kind of things from the place you live because you're a foodie, you may not be getting or seeing the posts from the nonprofits that you follow because you support. And that's just the reality of social media management right now. You can add into that the wonderful flood of AI-generated schlop that's falling onto social media platforms and making the whole experience just incredibly unpleasant for all of us. But really the outcome of this is just that users are spending a lot less time on social media than they used to. There are people who would spend hours a week online, and they're now basically saying, this is just, there's nothing here for me, and I don't want to be spending my time mindlessly scrolling through this. All of which is to say that nonprofits really shouldn't be relying on social media to reach audiences in the same way that we have for a long time. There was a period when we could say social media, put something out there and we know we're going to reach people under 30. And that's just not really going to be an effective strategy anymore. It's not necessarily to say that you should abandon social media outright, but we need to think of it more of a tool rather than the whole comprehensive strategy of how we're going to reach our audience. The second major trends to think about is that we are all overloaded. This is a very well-studied phenomenon that the human brain just is not configured to be receiving a constant stream of information all the time. Constantly receiving information basically means that we're not paying attention to anything at any one time. We're not fully paying attention to anything at any one time. And it means that we're operating sort of at that attention deficit that leads to that feeling of just continual exhaustion, even when you come back from a week-long vacation or just a few days out of the office. It's reflected on social media, obviously, and sort of that ultra short attention span that people have online. But it's also bleeding over into how people interact with our websites. The average time that someone now spends on a web page is less than a minute, whereas the vast majority of users to your website probably leave without ever scrolling very far down on your homepage. Not to say you need to completely overhaul your website to address these two trends, but it's just another indication of our traditional marketing methods the way users are reacting with our traditional marketing methods is changing quite a bit. So we need to begin to rethink sort of what we've done for the last 15 years in order to account for some of those changes. And then just to spend a minute sort of on the things that actually are working at the end of 2025. I will say right off the bat, it is very easy for marketing consultants to say, do more events. That is not what we're going to encourage here today. But one of the things we really that we have been encouraging folks to think about is marketing pieces or even communications pieces that allow your audience to receive information when they want to receive it, knowing that there are major differences by demographics and age and stuff like that, which for instance means, having newsletters that are maybe really long and informative, but there's something that somebody can set aside until they have a couple of hours on their calendar that they can put it aside and read it, or sending a direct mail piece because, if you're on the younger side of things, you probably don't actually get that much personalized, non-bulk advertising mail that comes in. So when you actually get something, you're pretty likely to pick it up and actually receive it. So direct mail kind of is one of those things that we would encourage. Obviously, it's a larger production to produce and higher budget to send out, but it is sort of that thing. It has historically always been strong for older audiences, and it has kind of, seen a little bit of a rebirth as younger audiences maybe check the mail only once or twice a week. But when there are things in there that aren't just a credit card ad, you pay attention to them. Email newsletters, as I said, not just e-blasts that have your upcoming events, but email newsletters that actually provide curated information are a very effective marketing strategy right now. The proof for that is the news publishing industry that has made a major pitch towards curated editorial style newsletters that sort of represent the news and are interpreted by a trusted individual. So sort of in the same way, we'd really encourage as you are thinking about your newsletter strategy to think about, maybe we don't publish twice a month or even monthly, maybe we shift to a quarterly approach, but really to be able to provide value to the folks you're trying to reach again. And if you can send it from, an individual versus just generally from your organization, that seems to have a bit more of a positive impact. Third-party validations are obviously a very helpful avenue for picking up some support, particularly when the third party is trusted by the audience you're trying to reach. So that is mentions in things like news and podcasts, Substack, stuff like different approach. It's sort of reprioritizing your limited marketing time from generating and more towards helping others talk about your work. And then, as I said, small events, creative fundraisers, or anything that has exclusive access, being able to take folks out on the river for a kayak at sunset if you're able to do that. Obviously, it's a very difficult thing to put on an event, so we're not going to say you should be doing events all the time. And it's just to say that all these strategies work if you have a clear understanding of who you're trying to reach and what you want them to do. If it's sort of just, hey, we're sending you some mail because we want you to know what's up with our organization, that's great. But it's better, perhaps if you want to focus it on, here are upcoming events for the summer, the things that we want to make sure you have on your calendar in case you want to come out and support our mission. So with all that context in mind, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about how this looks in terms of developing a marketing plan. I think the first thing to say is that building an effective marketing plan is actually easier than you think. That there are really it's a two-step process to begin to assess what you need to do. And then from that assessment, you can begin to identify the action items that you want to focus on, we'll say in the new year. The first thing to do is, spend some time either in these last few weeks of the year when marketing and communications folks have absolutely nothing going on their plate and definitely have a ton of free time. Doing a bit of an audit. You can also do this in the new year because that actually does tend to be a slightly less quiet time. But just doing an audit of what you did this year, thinking about what worked well, what didn't work, what seemed to generate those really loud crickets, where you seem to be spending a lot of time but not really seeing many returns. And then begin to think of, okay, what are some of the things that I can let go of this year, or sort of what are some of the new things that I want to test this year, knowing that, marketing is a blank slate. You can try out a lot of things. You don't have to do all of the, you've always done a monthly newsletter. You maybe don't have to always do a monthly newsletter. I'm going to give you that creative space to begin to think about doing things differently. And the second step of that is sort of, once you've done that audit of what worked well and what didn't work well, is to think about, okay, so I know who my audiences are. I know what didn't work well, and I know what is working well. So let me spend some time thinking about the key messages for those audiences, what I want them to do, and what are the ways that I'm going to reach them. Does it need to be an email newsletter? Do I need to spend much more time on LinkedIn? Do I need to be doing more direct mail? Anything like that. And we do have exercises to help with this. Once you've sort of done we will come back to those exercises in a moment. But then the second part of this activity is that once you've sort of done your audit and your assessment, you can begin to identify the action items, right? So that you have, you can ask yourself, all right, these are the audiences that I need to be reaching, and this is the ways that I want to do them. So now, what are the foundational changes that we need to put in place at our organization to make sure that we are actually effectively doing this, right? Maybe the type of thing of like, do we actually have buttons on our website that link to our social media accounts, or do we have a social media feed on our website? Do we actually have a newsletter sign up on our website? At Bold Bison, we've worked with 2 different organizations this year that in 2025 did not have a way on their website to sign up for their monthly newsletters. Maybe that you need to ask yourself whether the email addresses that we get on the clipboard at events are actually making it into our newsletter, or are we actually using content multiple times on different platforms, or is it just sort of we post something once on Instagram and hope the entire world sees it? Maybe that's something that actually needs to change in the new year. And then, do we need to revisit any of our brochures, any of our outreach pieces, just to make sure that they're actually interesting and of value to the audiences we're trying to reach, rather than just being those pure communications pieces that talk about our work in some ways. The answers to those questions and the action items you identify in the audit are your marketing plan for 2026. Vanity metrics, like saying we're going to increase our social media following by 15% next year, or we're going to bring in 20% more new donors next year, is not a marketing plan. Marketing plans built along some of these action-oriented items are things you can actually do. You can report back to your organization saying, here's what I accomplished this year, and here's where we are at the end of 2026 relative to where we were in January. They're not always the most exciting thing to do. They are sometimes a little more operational or a little more functional than they are creative, but building a stronger foundation is a much healthier place to start if you're a smaller organization than thinking about the vanity metrics of making up a number of how we're going to grow next year and trying to get there sort of in any way possible. So to help with the assessment sort of this, we do have, as I mentioned, we got 2 exercises. The first is a worksheet that we are going to drop into the chat, I hope. You can download this, do it on your own time, but you can also pull it up now and start to take a look at it. The front of the worksheet is to help a little bit with that audit of what's working well, and sort of what are the core values and messages you want to convey about your organization. And then on the reverse is sort of more of that tactical side of thinking about, okay, here's each of our priority audiences. Here is what we want, our objectives for what we want that audience to do, whether it's make a donation, participate in one of our programs, sign up for an event, things like that. Then key messages and ways you want to reach them. Again, this is pretty rudimentary, but this is also something that anyone on your staff can use. And it really is just trying to help map out those really fundamental buckets of sort of what are we trying to do. And after you've done this is where you can start to identify, all right, I need to make sure that all of these action items are captured in our marketing plan for next year. Second exercise that we have is going to be another breakout discussion, which we'll go to in a minute to help you begin to talk about this. But before we go to there, any questions on sort of the deep learning on marketing today? And I have not had the chat open as I've been talking, so if there's anything there, I can take a look.
We've had a couple of good suggestions that folks are using. So for instance, using uniquely colored envelopes or things that are sort of eye-catching in direct mail. Also suggestion that academics at one of the organizations have been leveraging writing for the conversation as a way to sort of get more visibility. So being part of a conversation. So reinforcing that sort of going to like where the conversation and sort of the trusted conversation is happening. Those are some ideas that bubbled up in the chat. Sharing them for the recording. And then also, yes, confirming that we will share out the slides and the recording afterwards.
I have a quick question. On your slide about it had a bullet point about mailers and either older folks appreciating mailers or younger folks that are not used to receiving non-advertising mail. What would be a marketing piece that you send to somebody that is not advertising?
Oh, sorry. What I mean by that is it's not a differentiation of the stuff that you send. It's more like I'm in Chicago, so I get all kinds of junk mail. I get the promos from the pizzeria around the corner from me. I get the credit card applications. I get like the generic sort of I don't even know what other stuff comes in, but it's sort of separating the bulk mail that is totally impersonalized to something that is just from the nonprofits I support. I mean, like I got an appeal letter from an organization that I've supported in the past, handwritten note from the executive director, and I donated to their Giving Tuesday campaign. So yeah, that's sort of what I mean. It's not so much like something that you said that's not advertising versus everything else. It's more the standing out from the general kind of bulk mail that comes to every single mailbox in the zip code.
Yeah,
Okay,
to rephrase slightly, it's also don't discount direct mail, particularly for younger constituents and younger audiences. Don't think it's something that like we've been told for a long time, but like, oh yeah, direct mail is dying because everything's digital. That's not true, particularly for younger adults. Any other questions? We will have more time for questions after the breakout activity. I know we lost a few people who had to leave at the top of the hour, but we are going to go into breakouts again. And the breakout instructions document, I'm going to drop in the chat again. There was also a link from the breakout instructions document to the interactive marketing plan PDF, if that is something that would be useful for you in your conversations. We're going to ask you to break off into pairs again. We've rebuilt the breakout rooms. I'm going to make one adjustment before we open them up, just to make sure that we've got a nice balance. But what we're going to ask you to do is identify an audience or marketing objective where you haven't had as much success in 2025 as you had hoped. And then working in pairs and considering today's learning and the conversation, brainstorm a new approach to test in 2026. So this idea of using this time to sort of think and collaborate with somebody else would be really great. And that's what we want you to take a little bit of time to do. So again, thinking about what's not working, thinking about what you might try in 2026, sharing some ideas, brainstorming a bit, and something that's sort of testable in 2026. Patrick, any further instructions while I adjust one thing in the breakout rooms?
Have fun. If you want to download the worksheet, you definitely can use that for this, but we didn't want you to necessarily have to sit in the breakout room and work through a worksheet with one another. So use it, the marketing plan, as it's helpful in conversation, but also if you just have a burning question in your head, we very much think of this as we are not the only experts in the room. And so we want to be able to give everyone space to kind of help one another with some of these challenges.
Looking at the time, I think we're going to adjust to about, I think we'll say about 10 minutes or so for this. We'll check into the rooms to see if folks need a little bit more time, but let's take about 10, 11 minutes and be back a quarter past the hour. Okay, if there are no other questions, I'll go ahead and open the breakouts. Welcome back, everybody. Would love to know what you talked about. Who would like to share either something interesting you heard from your conversation partner or something that you shared? We're curious about any aha moments you had or anything that you would love to share with the full group in the spirit of sort of sharing your conversation, sharing your knowledge.
Well, it was interesting to hear, this is Ariana from Hoorah. It was interesting to hear before we did the breakout about newsletters. Before I joined, we had been doing 4. I had dropped us down to 3 and thought like we only probably needed 2. But you had said, no, it's like that actually could be a good thing, which my founder will love to hear, keeping 3. The rest of the board also wants to keep us doing more print. So that was good information. That sounds like, it's useful. It's just hard to know, like, because people receive it, but you don't hear feedback necessarily that like, I love that content that you had. We do have a blog. We were talking about that in our breakout, that blogs can be useful, and we're going to do an overhaul of our website to hopefully make it more make us more visible.
Excellent. Can I ask you a follow-up? I'm curious about, you've got your print newsletter, you're doing the print newsletter 3 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
Are you also sharing out that type of sort of rich and more in-depth newsletter content in your emails?
Not as much. So the e-newsletter or e-blast, like, it depends on what the content, like we shared back in the spring, we shared a lot about PFAS because that was people really concerned about. We were having meetings about it. So we were sharing out about that. And, we usually provide links for people to continue to read about like our findings, and about our reports. But the e-newsletter itself, is mainly short blurbs linking to a blog on the website and also events.
The version of me from like 15 years ago would be horrified at what I'm about to say, but we've been discovering that some of that long form content directly in the email has been effective. And think about it this way, it's like the rise of Substack. It's like the rise of the things that folks want to consume directly in their email. Like even media, even the Atlantic or like the New York Times or things like that will do sort of their email, like here's a story that we're sending you directly to your email. And it's because what we found is that folks, and I do it too, they're like leaving something interesting they want to read unread in their inbox and going back to it when they have time, when they're on the train, when they're waiting in line somewhere, when something's going on, and sort of reading it directly in their email. So you might also want to play around a little bit with taking some of that great print newsletter content you have and sharing it out in long form, a few times, at in the email itself. Because we've been working with a group this year that was baffled. Like they get huge open rates, just insane open rates for their e-news, like 90% open rates. It's bonkers.
Oh.
Right? And like, but their click-through rates aren't very good, but they put their newsletter content like in the email. They do their stories in the email, and that's how folks are consuming it. So people will leave it unread, and they'll notice that people are reading their emails throughout the entire month because they want to keep the content. And then we did some survey and some conversations with some of their supporters and some of their stakeholders who were literally saying, when I want to remember that really interesting thing I heard from them, I will search my email for it to go find it as opposed to the website. So you might want to take some of that rich content that you're developing for the print newsletter and test some of that, in email form, testing some of that long form appetite that folks have right now.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Other things that folks talked about. I know we kind of dove deep right there, but other things that folks talked about, other things that folks have a question about or want to raise for the group, for the full group. Yeah, Emma. Good to see you, by the way.
Yay, thank you, Brandon. It's good to see you too. Um, so I remember when I first came into my organization, this was a brand new position, and the person in my breakout, that was also a brand new position for them as well, like created by the organization. And sometimes I think that, I mean, it's obviously a very important position to be created, someone solely handling or managing communications. But sometimes the organization hasn't really been informed about what that means for them. Um, and something that I really had to say multiple times, because I think they're like now, oh, somebody gets to handle this, and now I don't have to do that anymore. Um, you know, I now know quite a bit about the Cahaba River, but when I came here, I didn't really know much about the Cahaba River or how to speak about water, which is, I mean, really so far reaching. And so something that I said that I think communicators, especially ones early in their position or early in their career, have related to a lot is I've had to kind of tell leadership, I don't create the message. I strategically share the message. Because I think that they just want for me to like create this whole thing. And I'm like, well, I mean, that's kind of determined by y'all. And then I do it. And so that's something, and I found that even in my last organization as well, is I'm like, I don't know how to speak about the elderly. I was working at a council on aging. And so I'm like, y'all have that information. I can get it to the audiences you want. I can make a great campaign and do a great strategy, but that content kind of has to initially at least come from y'all. And that has kind of consistently been a challenge throughout my career, especially early in like the stage of a new organization. I think that they think a communications manager is like a magic wand. And I'm like, wait, there's still, you have to like invest in me a little bit before I can really take this thing on. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really resonant. And I think one way that we found to be sort of an effective way to talk about that is that in a perfect world, the communications person is like the conductor of the orchestra. Like everyone has the melody of the piece, the melody of the symphony is sort of that big through line for the organization with all of these variations, for, what is more appropriate for the horn section, what is more appropriate for the string section. So in other words, what is more appropriate for the version of that melody to be shared out by the program staff, by the outreach staff, by the board, by different elements of that. And sort of one of the unique sort of functions of the communications person is to be that person who has that eye on the full score of the symphony, but also doesn't necessarily write the detail of the score of the symphony. They certainly can, but also those techniques to develop culture within the organization too, in terms of conversations with the communications person. When I was in house at an organization for years, I would often go to folks' desks and sort of talk me through it. Like, just tell me, you don't have to write it down for me. Tell me about it. Let me record it. Let me not record you, however it might be, so that I can then take it and shape it to what it needs to be. But that those opportunities, that building culture in terms of sharing out information, also in staff meetings too, are there moments where there's celebrations of wins, or there are things that are servicing, and being able to invite your teammates to be able to explain for the full staff what's happening, so that you, the communications person, be listening with your ear to it, to kind of take that bit of the melody and then be able to add it into that symphony that you're trying to share out. So yeah, very, very resonant point. Patrick, do you have?
Just keep an eye on the time.
Yeah. Okay. In the interest of keeping an eye on the time, why don't we, I'll throw it back to you, Patrick.
Just wanted to share a few reminders from today to summarize. Definitely encourage, you will get the slides, the recording, and all of that today. Keep in mind those stages of that framework, the stages of marketing, because it really is our hope that that'll be a way to help you kind of determine where you are and what you should be focusing on next year, just as a way of helping you kind of, you have limited time, you have limited capacity, keeping a focus on stuff that's actually going to be relevant and effective for where your organization or where your program is at right now. A reminder that sort of as we've talked about kind of throughout the debriefs today, that the way people are consuming traditional forms of marketing has changed quite a bit in the last few years. And we need to just keep in mind that things that were effective 5 years ago may be totally bunk right now, like Twitter or something. So, just keeping in mind those changes do affect how we're able to reach people and how we're able to market them. And we need to stay on top of that. I know that's a big thing to say, stay on top of all marketing with all the time you have. But just it's something especially to keep in mind as you're talking to your leadership teams of your board, just that things are changing and that we can't necessarily do this thing we've always done because the board chair really likes it. If it's not effective, it's something that maybe we have to let go of. And then lastly, just that reminder, trust your gut. If it's not, you do this for a living, you consume this, you are an expert at this. If it doesn't feel like it's going to be effective for you, there's a good chance it's not going to be effective for your audience either. So yeah. We do want to talk about some questions. We have our contact info in a minute if you have any other follow-ups you want to send to us. And then I did want to do a plug we have one more workshop in this series coming up on January 15th. We're going to be talking about the monster under the bed, your organization's website. We're going to be taking a look at different approaches to managing your website so it's not such a cumbersome challenge or such a scary process to update it with fear of something breaking. Also, we'll be talking a little bit about how you can implement some accessibility best practices on your website, both as a way to ensure that you are meeting accessibility requirements, which is increasingly becoming a legal obligation, but that also help with audience acquisition and helping folks find your organization. So it'll be pretty helpful. That our contact info if you need it, though I'm sure Deanna can share that out as well afterward today. And with that, just going to say thank you and throw it back to a few closing announcements from River Network.
Yeah, no, my thanks to you all, Brandon and Patrick. This was excellent. And thank you all for taking the time to join us on here, the last learning session that River Network is hosting this year. I do want to encourage you to join us for the final one mid-January. So I just dropped the registration links in the chat, as well as the evaluation link. So please give us some feedback. And just before we close off, I just want another reminder that River Rally is coming up, our national conference. It's now on an every 2-year schedule. Keep an eye out on, I'm not going to say River Network's website after having been in this session. We will drop it into your inbox. Just that registration information, which will open up in February. So just learned that the city of San Antonio is a UNESCO City of Gastronomy. So if you're a foodie, join us for that and join us for some networking, fellowship, and learning, along with hundreds of other river and water folks from around the country. So with that, again, big thanks to Bold Bison. It's always a pleasure. And I hope all of you have a great rest of your day and a happy holiday season.
Thank you.